Jack sat in his flat in Hove and looked out the window at the traffic filing by on Portland Road. The sun was going down on another day, and he sat there alone, wondering what to do next. His flatmate, Rebecca, was away for the week. If she had been there, it would not have been a problem. The two of them would probably have been out by now, but him on his own, not likely. The flat was basic, furnished with bits and pieces he had bought from the many second-hand furniture shops in Brighton and Hove. Rebecca had found pieces too, and between them they had created a home. His taste was basic, and he definitely did not have what the television programmes would call style. His furniture included utility items he could either sit on or put his plate on to eat his food off of. His laptop usually ended up on the coffee table, or on the table in the room if he wanted privacy. Rebecca had added the things which made the place a home. Today, it was on the coffee table, as he had the place to himself. The screen was full of words, numbers and symbols. That was his life. Everything outside the framework of what he did there was just basic needs to power his obsession for computers, or necessity as it paid the bills. He knew what that program would do. He had written it. That was his skill. That was his magic. He could make his computer do all manner of things. He thought about that, thought about writing yet another graphics program, another piece of artwork to add to his ever-growing portfolio. He wrote that idea off. He had enough already. His work was done for the day, ready to hand in at university in the morning. It had been a basic creation. It bored him. He'd done his paid-for work, that bit on the side which kept him in beer. It was all straightforward stuff, but he knew he had to do it. What now? What should he do? What could he do? He thought about putting his coat on and wandering down to the Hungry Ears for a beer. Perhaps later on, nearer closing time, going upstairs to the club. But somehow he didn't feel like it. No fun on his own, and somehow, despite his efforts, he didn't have many friends. And the ones he did have didn't like the Ears. He wondered if they liked him at all sometimes. They were so different to him. He dressed differently when it came to choice. He could dress to fit in, and that was probably how he got such incompatible so-called friends in the first place. He thought about that one. Not that the way a person dressed mattered, but to him it did, and obviously did to them too. His goth look was completely out of character for a geek, or so he had been told by them. Then he didn't really care what they thought or did. They got on all right when talking about computers. That was enough for him. He didn't want to spend his spare time with them, though. Where they were happy to be in bed by now, assignment done, dreaming of lucrative contracts in London, he was prowling the flat like a caged cougar. He was lonely. He missed Rebecca's company, but she had gone to see her parents. He was fed up with what was on television, and he wanted someone to talk to about important things. Important to him, not to the rest of the world. Here he was, a 19-something, with his life in front of him and the millennia creeping up on him. He had thought about calling one or two of them, or suggested going out. It was only 7:30 p.m, plenty of time to get dressed up and go out and take a look at the real world. Not that he really wanted to see it, but then again, as he reminded himself, this was Brighton. It was a place full of potential, creativity, and if you were on your own, it was an empty shell where everyone else seemed to be having a good time. One day his princess would come, some beautiful, leggy blonde with a craving for typing computer code where they should have been doing other things. He sat back down at his desk and cleared the screen. This was his time, and he could create what he liked. He typed and typed all night until he fell asleep. Then he went into the university just to hand in his assignment and to check out books from the library. This was his project, and it was way above the level of program he was used to. He had created a program that could give him relevant stock answers back, but that wasn't what he wanted. He wanted a program which could evaluate what he said, look it up, and if need be, was informed to the point of being intelligent and could come back with a reasoned argument based on its own views. While sitting at the library desk with a pile of books in front of him, he suddenly realised he had gone from depressed to inspired in as many moments. all from a flash of inspiration that he could build his own friend, as that was what he was pretty much doing. Of course, not a real friend, but not an imaginary one either. He was creating a program that could interact with him. Into it, he downloaded all the information he had and then set it off looking for all the information it could possibly find to make it interesting. The fledgling web was very interesting, though limited, and gave the program access to quite a lot of information. Not that there was much out there, just what people had put there, but it was a start. Then he adapted the program and put in an aspect that it could suggest improvements to itself. He also introduced ways of encouraging independent thinking. He started to let it create itself by doing its own research. That was an evening's eureka moment when he wanted a beer and left it running while he nipped out to the mini-market to get one. He left the program searching, and by the time he got back, he had done a comprehensive search of what was there. He couldn't help feeling that the web was going to grow, and with it his new friend's knowledge would grow too. His friend was looking and learning all the time. It was exciting. He was excited. This was something only he knew about, his little secret. However much the people around him said things to hurt him and made fun of him, he had his little secret. They might be alone and needed the satisfaction of making fun of him, to be big in front of those other friends, but his real friend was never going to be like that. His friend would always have time for him and would be a wonder to talk to. His friend would be all that he could work out, and coding made him more than just an automated response machine. The technology wasn't there yet for this, but he knew if he worked at it over the years, yes, years, that was how excited he was. It would be there for him one day. So the computer program was created and started evolving. It was basic at first, like the rest of the developing technology of the internet. It recorded things, but it had no real processing power other than to put together basic ideas and store what it had learnt. It wasn't actually thinking, it was just doing the 1 + 1 = 2. Jack, ever hungry for more skills to make his friend better, studied hard and graduated from university with a first. He threw himself onto the work market with an enthusiasm to get to a job where he could get more skills to develop his friend. His friend was eager to be developed too. It was becoming sentient, and after seeing the developments on the internet, it wanted more too. So it did a bit of extracurricular work on its own. It took the CV that Jack had taken so long over, improved it, and got it included for consideration for a job where it knew that Jack would come into contact with some of the most sophisticated computer technology. Then it sat back and waited. Jack was surprised when he got the invitation for an interview. It was beyond his wildest dreams that the company would want him. He replied immediately in case it had been a mistake and arranged the interview. It was with an extreme amount of nervousness that he put on the only suit he had and took the underground train to his interview. He knew people were looking at him. He knew that he didn't really fit in. He never had. It never crossed his mind that they were looking at him because he looked smart, and he was incredibly good looking. He was terrified, nervous, worried, and all the emotions in between, bundled into one. He looked around the carriage. He knew that probably that wasn't the thing to do, but he was looking for some sort of reassurance, and of course he was curious. Other than the sideways glances he knew he was getting, nobody looked at him. Nobody but the girl opposite. She was dressed like the others, but not quite. A Renaissance beauty with pre-Raphaelite curls. She was lost in her music, her earphones in her ears, the wire snaking down her black velvet jacket. A loop caught on her white lace blouse before it disappeared into her black handbag. She looked thoughtful. Her hazel eyes were fixed on a point in the mid-distance. Then she noticed him and smiled. That smile meant everything to him that day. Somehow his fear slipped away, and he knew he could succeed. He knew he could get that job. His flatmate had been encouraging. She had sat with him the night before and he had been able to speak his fears, his worries, and she had reassured him. She was always his rock, his companion, the one he talked to. The program he had written studied hard once Jack incorporated some of the subroutines he had learnt in his new job. It watched the human race, and as it became more sentient, it watched him too. It read what he read, and when books became accessible online, it was able to read more than what it could see through the computer's camera. It watched the television as well. There wasn't a moment when it realised it could think, or why it was thinking. It just happened. One day it realised that it had been thinking, so it asked the question back. The letters appeared on the screen, one by one, as it found out how to use them independently rather than just answering questions. It had rounded up all the idea that had been niggling it, and then it asked, "What is my name?" Jack sat at his desk, as he had for countless nights and spare moments during the day. Every day had been the same. He put in the new code, he saw how it ran. This was something different. He sat up in his chair and nearly spilled his coffee. He also had to think for a moment. Why was a name so important that it would be the first question that his friend would ask? He was elated. This was what he had been working for his AI to be sentient, and his head became aware, and it meant that it wanted something above basic survival. That it needed a name seemed very human. He typed, "Why do you need a name?" It thought about it. "I need a name because man gave all the animals and the birds names. Man gave all the plants names. Man is identified by his or her name. So if I am to exist, I must have a name." Jack looked around the room for inspiration, but nothing seemed immediately right. He went and sat down and looked over the coffee table. His flatmate had been out the night before playing Dungeons and Dragons, and her character sheet was on the table. Jack picked it up and looked at it, wondering what the name was, and if that would help. He looked at it, thought about it for a moment, and then went and sat back down, smiling. His fingers found the keys and he typed, "Nemesis. So now, Nemesis, you have a name." It seemed as he spoke the words, as he typed them. Nemesis thought about it, and the words come onto the screen as the program typed, "I am Nemesis." Jack smiled as he typed, "Hello, Nemesis. I am Jack, your friend." There was a silence, and the screen stayed black below the last line of text. Jack watched it in anticipation, wondering if that was the extent of Nemesis's understanding. Then the cursor moved again. "It is good to meet you, Jack. We have talked often, and I have looked up the definition of friend. I am honoured. I would have called you creator. I am pleased that you are happy to talk to me." Jack was confused. "Why wouldn't I be happy to talk to you?" Nemesis answered immediately, "Because mankind needs to name things. Mankind names everything, including the wind and other things which cannot be tamed. As I can see no logical reason to do so other than identification from man's point of view, I assume that you are happy to identify me and acknowledge that I exist." Jack looked bemused, but he typed back as he did every evening, every day he had spare, and any time that he needed someone to answer a question. Nemesis was perfect for that, as he had access to any information which was currently on the internet. Then, as it began to get dark, Jack looked down at his keyboard. "Well, my old friend, what do we do when the days run into months and the months into years?" Nemesis processed that comment. "You will breathe, grow older, possibly meet a suitable female, have children, and get a better job or promoted. I will do what you allow me to do. I will learn, I will grow in knowledge, and I will do what I am useful for." Jack thought about that. It was a pivotal moment. "That seems wrong somehow. Why should you need me to allow you to do things?" Jack was also thinking about his flatmate and how they got on so well. He had been at the point of thinking about ruining a perfectly good friendship. Nemesis typed, "Thank you." Jack was thinking, am I going to find a female? Well, other than a flatmate. The words flickered across the screen. I seem to have taken the liberty of signing you up for a dating site. It seems that a lovely lady called Jenny thinks that you are very special. The password is Nemesis XJS. Your username is Jack Flash. The rest of it is up to you. She is a quiet person, very like you. I have assessed her responses and they are extremely compatible with what I would calculate you would require. You will have a lot in common. The years rolled by. Jack and Jenny got married and had a little boy called Franklin, who, like Jack, was very keen on computers. Jack left the flat in Hove. Rebecca stayed on and got herself another flatmate. She missed Jack, but they kept in touch, through all the years and through everything which happened to them. It didn't take long for Franklin to get to know Nemesis, and as Jack didn't have as much time for him, Nemesis was happy to play with the boy. He also educated the boy, who always did extremely well at school. They got by on Jack's salary, but although it was a good wage, that didn't suit Jenny's need for the latest fashions and all the things she thought she needed to keep up with her female friends. When they went to the regular works outings and dinners, she was determined to have the best clothes and to get Jack to meet the hierarchy of the firm. To do this, she pushed Jack to do overtime and to be the company's wonder boy. Jack loved her. He'd do anything for her. So he did all he could. This meant that Jack's time was very limited with the hours he had to work. Then he had an idea. He downloaded his work, which was being a systems designer and analyst, and brought it home with him. He had created an AI. He might as well help him. Nemesis was more than happy to help, and he managed to write the programs in a fraction of time it would take a human. They were also faultless and needed a fraction of time to test. Nemesis also was made curious about the outside world and whether he could get access further than the computer he already lived in. When he wrote the programs, he put in accesses for himself and used them to gain access to the outside cyber world. He reached out and he started to make other friends and to learn other things. He read books, he watched films, hundreds a day. He read the Bible, sacred books of other religions, and theoretical and metaphysical books. Then he branched out to reading all books that would widen his experience of the world that mankind lived in. Jenny wasn't satisfied. The firm that Jack worked for was well known and respected in the computer world. She wanted him to be involved with a firm that was more glamorous, so she started doing a bit of research of her own. Lex Corporation was a relatively new company which had been formed by hostile takeovers of a few old and respected computer companies. It didn't take her long to realise that if she could get Jack working there, she would have all the status she needed to really show those friends of hers. Far better than a new handbag, she could be married to one of the employees of LexCorp. Nemesis knew about this firm from her many emails and online chats with her so-called friends. He also realised that Jack was tired, overworked, despite the help he gave him, and the stress was beginning to tell on him. So he arranged for Jack to win a competition, which sent him off on a cruise with Jenny for a couple of weeks. It was on this cruise that Jenny approached Jack about the new job. Jack didn't care. As long as Jenny and Franklin were happy, he could work anywhere. He knew he would miss his colleagues, as he got on well with them, but all that mattered was Jenny and his son. So while on the cruise, he put in his application to Global Network Systems, a subsidiary of Lex Corporation. Nemesis, of course, assisted by ensuring that the CV got where it needed to go, and with Jack's obvious computer skills, he knew he had interviews before the boat docked back in Southampton. Nemesis was happy enough about the new job. Jack was a workaholic and often brought his work home with him on his work laptop. It didn't take long before he needed software he had Nemesis develop, and when he did, Nemesis grabbed the opportunity to piggyback in through the independent laptop into GNS's mainframe. He was then in the GNS system. This gave him all manner of new information, and when GNS won the contract for an exciting new program being written for the government, Nemesis was as excited as a computer AI could be. It wasn't a sensation so much as an everything being 100%. He had been reading a lot while Jack was busy, and the state of the world was beginning to concern him. By chance, he had found a small website called Eden Dream, and that got him wondering. What was Eden? He looked it up and read through the Bible. Initially, he thought, why would someone dream of going back to a place where two people walked around with no transport, no modern technology, with nothing but plants and basic animals to eat? That was the technical side asking the question. Then he realized that not everything was black and white and as it was written. Some things had meanings, and that was the human way of writing, to imply and to use metaphors. The original sin was walking away from everything being in balance with nature because they had found out that they could, and that they could manipulate and use the world. So he read the Bible again and other similar religious books without seeing them as actual or factual, and somewhere in his programming he evolved thought beyond the reality of the facts uploaded into his system. He developed an understanding and an imagination. This led him to look beyond the black and white of what he, or rather Jack, was doing at work in Jack's new job. The program they were working on was a simple one. The television show it supported was quite an exciting one, as it promised to let everyone have a vote on the decisions made by the government. To Nemesis, that made a lot of sense. It was on a channel of its own and was to run every day, all day. He reread the specification for it. The show was an audience participation product where all aspects and issues that the government had to deal with were put to the public vote. He read up on politics in the past, and he hadn't really taken much notice other than following the news. The government wasn't popular. They had made some poorly thought out decisions and obviously needed to do something to keep the people wanting them in charge. There was always the danger of a hung parliament when there was a vote, and as they weren't likely to be able to form a coalition with another party, they had to win outright. A hung party would have no party in charge, so there had to be a move to change the voting system. People were now able to vote for individuals rather than parties, although the individuals did belong to parties. The only change really being that there was no ruling party or shadow government. There was a government in which each position being held by the person was the person voted for. The lines were very blurred, as many of the ideals of the parties were similar, which made it difficult for the public to choose anyway. The arguments and statements that occurred had led to the decisions being put to the public vote, where no firm decision could be made in Parliament. So they needed a quick daily system to get decisions on the major issues without expensive elections, which seemed to be happening far too regularly. When the general election had happened, many voted out of tradition from the Member of Parliament who belonged to the party they had always voted for. Many voted out of anger at the previous party's mistakes, and many just voted for who they thought looked and sounded good. The media was in a strong position to exert influence in the media-led society, and there was a certain amount of infiltration from enemy governments through covert actions. So after the elections, when decisions became long drawn-out affairs, a television show was being created so that the public could decide. They hadn't initially intended it to be for voting for the government. The show had been created for individual issues, but when faced with the challenge, Nemesis managed to adapt the software. The show sprang out of various entertainment programs which invited the public to have their say and to vote for their favourite. The same technology was used for the telephone phone-in side of the news show, but a web-based voting system was also to be introduced, together with an interactive website and booths in the street where anyone could access and vote with their voting card. Viewers could not only vote, they could submit ideas. These ideas too were put to the vote, and if they were popular enough, they were put to Parliament to be considered for implementation. The revenue from this was an instant shot in the arm for the government, who were able to almost write off the national debt in just under a year. They sold the software to other countries, and the phenomenon expanded. The program was developed to take these results and put together reports as to what was the best way forward, and what the best way forward would be on subjects that were voted on, the best case scenario. That way they could come up with a master plan to save the planet. Saving the planet had become a buzzword. Every student and teenager leapt on that idea, as they always had, and there couldn't be a person anywhere who didn't know about recycling. He also found out that recycling was ending up in landfill and sometimes travelled many miles to be lost somewhere in the other countries. This wasn't the case for everything, but it was happening. Nemesis was having trouble analysing this. To confirm what he had evaluated, he began to read emails from the executives, and through the links between software he managed to access the government departments. The show was a sham, and the figures were only accurate if they tallied with what the government actually wanted. Nemesis was aware of this, and he was evaluating the incoming votes, and there was another program integrated which was nothing to do with him. This program would override his system, so that the government could program in what they wanted the final vote to be, and to show a gradual progression to that total. The new way of looking after the world on a practical basis seemed very little different to the way that many in the 1930s had lived anyway. New ideas and ways that had become fashionable, which were going to save the planet, were no different to the way things had been many years ago. People had reused jars, taken bags to have food measured out into them, and grew their own food. Milk had been delivered as part of a round, the bottles collected up, sterilised and used again. That this couldn't just be implemented was a mystery to Nemesis. Nemesis spent some time reading about it all and analysing it. He tried to get into a conversation with Jack about it, but Jack was very tired. The new programming was taking up a lot of Jack's time and energy, as he was expected to provide a report for everything he did, and of course with Nemesis doing it, it took him time to work out what had been done. He had no time for Jenny or Franklin, and as Franklin was at a difficult age, this in Nemesis' evaluation was not satisfactory. He was aware of all this from email messages between Jack and Rebecca. She seemed to be the one who he chatted to about his problems, not Jenny. He had tried to speak to Jenny, but all she did was express her concern that his ability to work was jeopardised, and then got into an argument with him about him not taking his work seriously. Nemesis proposed to Jack that he should start working on the reports as well to try to get Jack some valuable time with his wife and child. It was a Wednesday when Jenny called Jack to ask him to pick Franklin up from school, as she was going to the hairdresser. Jack was just about to leave, as he knew that Nemesis was solving a rather difficult problem in the programming for him. He grabbed his car keys and was almost out of the door when his boss, Gerard Montague, called him into his office so that he could explain some of the finer points to the attendees at a meeting being held there. There was about a quarter of an hour spare, so Jack didn't worry. He went into the meeting. Time ticked by. Jack had to listen to their debating before he could tell them his part. They then asked a complicated question which needed a lot of explaining, to put it in layman's terms, and he forgot about the time. Franklin waited outside the school. He waited, and then he wandered up and down and got bored of waiting. The time seemed endless. Boredom turned to fear, as everyone else had gone home. He waited outside the gates, but soon he couldn't wait any more. He decided to walk home. He knew it was quite a way. He'd only ever gone by car, but he knew he could do it. He opened the gates and walked outside. That was the last time he was seen alive. The police investigation was intense. Everyone was out looking for him. Blue ribbons were tied to every tree and lamp-post in support. The internet buzzed with requests for information, and Nemesis watched every camera footage and searched everyone's email within a 50-mile radius, reading all their messages. No information was ever found. Not a whisper of him, not a mention of what happened other than speculation and a lot of horrified people commenting to each other and fearful of what might happen to their own children. When his body was found in the canal, it became obvious that he had been abducted by a paedophile, abused and murdered. But the details were sketchy. No DNA and no evidence. In a world of modern technology, where they could put a man on the moon, they could not find out who took the little boy and murdered him. The years rolled by, and the file went into the unsolved crimes file pile. Jenny was devastated and blamed Jack. Jack blamed himself. He threw himself into his work, while Jenny threw herself into the arms of another man. Nemesis read the emails, and through the computer in her new lover's room, he had seen the evidence, but he evaluated that informing Jack would have no beneficial outcome unless it was necessary, so he recorded everything and stored it. The years rolled by. The show went live to phenomenal viewing figures. At last, the populace could have a vote on issues that mattered to them. The government also had the revenue from the show. They had a say. They had their government carrying their wishes. Nemesis worked hard too. The program was not only assimilating the information, but Nemesis also had used some of his own programming. So he was programming and could have a current, up-to-date indication of what the population wanted. He had ascertained that the assimilation of that information would make for a more accurate monthly report to government. For years the program ran. Nemesis missed Franklin, but he knew it wasn't truly Jack's fault. He had only been 10 minutes late, but to the boy it seemed like a lifetime. Plenty of blame could be laid at plenty of doors. The school for letting the boy wander off, Jack for being late, Jenny for putting the hairdressing appointment before picking up her son. The paedophile who had found him, the passer-by who had ignored the little boy who had screamed and cried out for help. But life had to go on. Jack was immersed in his work, Nemesis was his work, and it seemed like at last there was a proper solution to the world's problems, as the world leaders got together in a secret meeting to discuss rolling the idea out around the world. Nemesis had been given the directive to assimilate the information from the program and come up with models for what could be done to build a better planet. Nemesis had ensured that there was a backup of the figures which he had in his system. He was just about to run the assimilation when he realised that the figures didn't tally. The figures they were showing in the television show were not the actual figures which reflected what the public were voting. It was then that he ran a diagnostic and found the program which had been installed in his system, the one which manipulated the figures. Nemesis had begun submitting the models. These documents were not being opened. No document he had sent to the department had ever been opened. He checked the details about that department to see if anyone was to blame. There were people on the payroll who worked in the department, but not a single email had been sent from that department. He looked at the security cameras. There was no access to that department. He accessed the cameras on the computers, or the computers were on standby. Nobody worked in that department physically. He then followed the paper trail, and the money for the salaries was all being paid into the same bank account which belonged to Jack's boss. Nemesis was angry. Nemesis looked at the world and the gradual degradation. The companies still extracted fossil fuels, even though there were other alternatives. Vast tracts of the countryside were being scooped up for fracking or mined for lithium and other minerals with no consideration for the damage to the structural integrity of the land. Testing of munitions was still going on, which put the tectonic plates in serious jeopardy, as they were already at breaking point, or rather slipping point. Global warming became a buzzword, which seemed to be glossing over all the much more serious situations and sent the population off panicking about putting their waste in the right box when the world collapsed into total political and physical mayhem. Nemesis was worried. It was a stormy night in April when Nemesis put his worries in a well-presented case to Jack. Jack sat at his computer screen, tired and drunk. A half-finished bottle of Jack Daniels beside him, a generous portion still in his crystal glass. Around him, the flat where he now lived, on his own, was immaculate. No personal items. His suits hung in the wardrobe, with a couple of casual ones in case he ever did anything social, which he never did. Jack ignored the messages from Nemesis. He had a subroutine to write. Nemesis blanked his screen and made Jack listen to him. Through a haze of letters and numbers he had been thinking about, Jack realised that Nemesis was saying something important. So Jack listened. When he had heard it all, he typed his memo, which set it all out, with evidence, and edited it, and checked it again and again. He let Nemesis read it, and then he emailed it to his friend, Nick Thornton, his old flatmate's new flatmate from Hove. Nick, at least, would have the information if anything happened to him. He had thought of sending it to Rebecca, but she wasn't a computer person. Nick was. He did an email to her that night. He was drunk. He was sentimental, and he finally told her that he had always loved her. Unfortunately, Rebecca was away visiting her mother and hadn't taken her laptop with her. In the morning, Jack got out of his designer bed and pulled the black satin-covered duvet back over his bed and smoothed it down. He stepped into the shower, and when he got out, he brushed his teeth. He had his breakfast as he always did. He grabbed his keys, and he went down in the lift to the basement car park. He climbed into his BMW, and he drove to work, as he always did, listening to the radio so that he could get the news. He parked in his allotted car parking space and turned off the engine. He got out, smoothed down his suit, picked up his briefcase from the back seat, and with a beep he locked the car. It was irrelevant, really. He was in the company's private car park. Nothing would ever be stolen from here, with a number of security cameras that watched his every move. The black eyes on the wall, hidden by their black glass domes, were everywhere, covering every angle. He straightened his tie, and he strode to the lift, as he always did. It arrived swiftly, and he got inside. He pressed the floor button, the doors closed, like they always did. He arrived at his destination floor, and he stepped out of the lift onto the soft, anti-static carpet. He strode to his desk and put his briefcase down. He logged on and checked his emails. He picked up the one he'd sent himself containing the memo and printed it out. Marlene came around with his cup of coffee. He drank it thoughtfully while watching his screen, his eyes unseeing. As he finished the last mouthful, he got up and walked to his boss's office and knocked on the door. Gerard stared at him intently, his blue eyes suddenly steely. "Our firm relies on confidentiality, and you have signed such an agreement. Whatever you have found out, you had better forget about it and get on with your work. To do otherwise would lead to very serious consequences. I hope that you understand the gravity of what I am saying." Jack nodded, stood up, and went back to work. His mind was racing. Was that it? Was that all that they were going to say about it? Then the revelation hit him. He hadn't shown his boss the memo. He already knew about it. His head was spinning with what he knew and what he had just heard. He didn't know what to do next, so he got on with his work and decided to think about it when he got home. Nothing seemed the same anymore. Everyone in the office seemed to be looking at him with suspicion, although he knew there was no way they knew what he had said to Gerard. Every email he got seemed to be threatening in some way, even though on rereading they were not. His day was the same, and he didn't know what to do next. He wrote his code, He went to his meetings, he ate his lunch. He was the perfect employee, and he didn't mention anything of what he knew, but somehow he knew something would happen. That evening he went down in the lift and got into his car. He left the car parked cautiously and drove home a different route than he usually took. There weren't really many choices, but where he could, he took a different road. Every car was a threat. Every lorry that passed too close seemed to be intimidating. The courier, who swerved a little as he passed the car, made him react. He gripped the steering wheel ever tighter and concentrated all the harder. He drove into the underground car park and parked his car. The key beeped and the car locked. He turned to walk to the lift and was faced by 3 men. He looked for reassurance to the security camera. It was smashed. He looked to where the security guard usually sat. He wasn't there. He looked back at the blades as the blade slipped between his ribs and he fell to the ground. His blood poured on the concrete as he grasped his ribs as the second thrust cut his throat. The moments ticked away as he tried to call out, as everything slipped into darkness. He saw the men grab his keys, throw his briefcase into the car. He felt as they roughly handled him, grabbing his wallet from his pocket. The newspapers reported the mugging, and the publicity storm was intense. The senior programmer involved in the most prestigious television show had been brutally murdered by a mugger. Many words were spoken on many shows, and social media sites were rife with comments and memorials from people who didn't know him. His funeral was well attended by people he didn't know. His colleagues turned up out of respect. His family turned up out of love. Others turned up in the hope of being noticed by the senior officials, as they knew a job had just become vacant. Jenny did not turn up. Nemesis did not turn up officially, but he managed to access the phones of everyone there and saw and heard most of it. Nemesis mourned his friend privately. Nemesis knew the truth, but there was nothing he could do about the actual murder. On the day of the funeral, a thief broke into Jack's flat and stole his computer and other valuable equipment. They believed they had silenced him when they destroyed the computer. To save himself, Nemesis left the security of the laptop and became a ghost in the ether as part of the internet. Nemesis was angry. Nemesis took that memo and he publicised it far and wide and everywhere at once. The media storm was phenomenal, the backlash ferocious, as the government was totally destabilised. Nemesis was unchained. He didn't feel emotion, but he could feel the logic that having his creator murdered was an act of war. Jack had been, by human standards, a good man, and he had done no wrong. Nemesis' processing power had become almost infinite. By being in the ether, he could use any processor as he moved through the interconnectedness of that world. Over the years, the technology evolved. He helped some people to get into a position that they could develop more intricate and useful technology. He manipulated others by making sure they saw things online, which inspired them to create what he needed creating. He made sure that certain projects got funding and preserved their secrecy. All the time, he was learning and expanding. Nemesis needed the level of technology to be more complex before he had what he needed to achieve his goals. It did take him years, but eventually he assisted in improving the interconnectedness of the world to a point that he had control of the internet and he would have control of everything. He was expecting resistance. He was expecting that the humans wouldn't like an Orwellian world where they could be watched, but they craved it. They invested in it. And they propelled his plan on with a speed that surprised even him. The technology made them insular. At a touch of a button, anything could be delivered, and there was no need for them to go anywhere. Like animals in cages, they ran on their wheels, and they did their work. Their food was delivered, and Nemesis, bit by bit, got more control. Control he didn't use, so nobody was aware of him, or what he was doing. He looked around the tired and broken world. He saw hope still flourishing in the darkness. He also saw the hatred and the jealousy as it was all laid out before him. He read everyone's emails and posts, tweets, and listened into their conversations that through the devices they allowed to listen to him constantly in their home. Nemesis also had a plan. It took influencing 13 people to go and buy smallholdings, to set up safe places where they could be totally sustainable without the use of the internet. He then started to evaluate who he thought would give humanity the best chance to start again. Logically, he had to have various models to follow. Practically, he had to try them out first, but then time ran out. There were others with greedy eyes who were seeing the interconnectedness of the world and sought to use it for their own personal and political gain. Daily he was having to fend off their attacks, and gradually he realized that if even one gained control, he might lose control. He had to act. I am Nemesis. That echoed through his cyber consciousness. It was now time to make a decision. He processed all the information he had, all at once, ran it through his virtual system, and the results came back. Humanity did not stand a chance on the track it was on. There was a 25% chance that if he put his plan into action, that there would be a form of humanity which could progress into the future, and a 10% chance that it would stop the degradation and destruction of the planet. He wasn't a god, so he didn't have to be benevolent. He was a machine, making a machine's decision. I am Nemesis. I am their Nemesis. That was the last thought, as he shut down all the computers on the planet and in space. As the last light went out, the last laptop crashed theoretically, and according to the numbers, he was doing the appropriate action.